Social injustice is a pervasive issue that continues to shape our societies and affect the lives of millions of individuals around the world. It permeates various aspects of our lives, from systemic discrimination in education and employment opportunities to prejudice and bias in social interactions, and above all, deadly confrontations. I am Abdullahi Hassan, welcoming you to In the Sahel, WADR's weekly magazine where we delve into the heart of the African security crisis, telling the stories and strategies that shape the region's response to pressing challenges. Last week's episode was on the nexus between competition for natural resources and insecurity. This week, we are asking about some of the repercussions of unfair court rulings.
When people perceive that the judgment delivered by a judicial officer is not fair in all intents and purposes, the people will tend to take laws into their hands. Not only does such practice dampen the morale of the people or the trust of the people on the judiciary, it makes the people to be lawless because they feel that going to court will be a waste of time, that they will not get judgment. And that is the case we see in Nigeria and in other African countries.
The judicial system refers to the system of courts that pass judgment on whether a person or legal entity has broken the law and impose appropriate punishment. It includes a variety of professionals who work as judges, lawyers, defense and prosecution services, paralegal practitioners, and court personnel. There may also be systems of alternative dispute resolution mechanisms such as tribunals, mediation services, and community-based resolution mechanisms, or military judicial systems that have jurisdiction over armed forces personnel and operate parallel to civilian judicial systems. But in all cases, how they do their jobs still has a direct impact on security. Imo Edet tells us more.
The judicial system is critical for ensuring the rule of law, and this affects both public safety and national security in two separate ways. The first role of the courts is to administer justice by ensuring that people accused of crimes are appropriately judged and fairly punished accordingly. This justice function is essential to the work of security providers in preventing impunity, and also means the judicial system works closely with both police and prisons. The process whereby a suspect is apprehended, charged, judged, and punished involves all of these state security institutions and is sometimes called the criminal justice chain. The second role of the courts is to provide a check on government power by ensuring that all of the laws passed by governments and parliaments respect the fundamental principles and rights set down in a country's constitution and its other organic laws. This oversight function can protect from violations of rights and abuse of power by security providers and the political authorities that control them. The courts may be the last line of defense when governments enact laws or policies that do not respect the fundamental principles of human rights or try to politicize security institutions. However, failures in the first and second functions of the judiciary have sparked conflicts at different levels across the world, Africa, and in countries of the sub-region, because rights were violated or parties to a case felt marginalized, discriminated against, sidelined, and wrongfully or unduly sentenced. It is worth noting that the implications of social or judicial injustice are not confined to national borders, as they fuel economic inequality and social disparities, therefore exacerbating instability, conflict, and mass migration. The effects of this seen in communities include the vicious cycle of poverty and despair, and limited access to quality education, healthcare, and employment.
Imo Edet reporting there. In countries such as Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Ghana, and most recently Togo, Sierra Leone, Senegal, and Nigeria, the perceived lack of political neutrality, trust deficit, and delayed hearings have sparked violence. Many of these agitations will originate from alleged unfair and undesirable rulings on electoral disputes, land altercations, or intercommunal relations and entitlements on natural resources. Lives were lost and properties destroyed. Yet, this trend continues in the most likely way, beginning with the arbitrary or unlawful arrest of individuals. Barrister Fred Nzioku is a Nigerian constitutional lawyer.
Of course, you know that the old saying holds that judiciary is the last hope of the common man. And we have also found out that as far as the judiciary is concerned, it is the last hope of everybody. Whether the fellow is a common man or an elite, a follower or a leader. Judiciary is there to treat all manner of persons with equity, justice, and fairness. And judiciary is there to ensure that the rights of citizens are not trampled upon by the authorities, and also to defend the citizens against undue bad practices that affect their fundamental right to welfare and their right to living. But when the judiciary fails in this mandate, or when the judiciary fails to uphold what is just, what is equitable, and what is fair, it amounts to unfair treatment, which is not expected to come from the courts. The court will always be mindful of the difference between judgment and justice.
And so what is the difference, Barrister, between judgment and justice?
Yes, judgment is the end point of any trial or any litigation. But justice is bringing out the fairness in that judgment. There may be judgment without justice, but there cannot be justice without judgment. So any trial that ends with judgment that is devoid of justice cannot be said to be fair, and cannot be said to advance the cause of justice, and cannot be said to advance the fundamental role of judiciary or the fundamental role of the court in the society. And that is why the court will always aim at ensuring that there is justice in its judgment. Otherwise, the judgment that does not advance the cause of justice is at best a charade.
Would you agree to some of the debates right now, arguments that the judiciary in West Africa, Nigeria inclusive, is under attack? Because instead of having what you've rightly described, justice, what we have is judgment. And we can go to one of the most recent development, the verdict that was handed down just after the 2023 general elections.
Yes, the judiciary is under attack in West Africa, and indeed in other parts of Africa, not only in West Africa. And what has brought the judiciary under attack? The judiciary is under attack anytime it fails to deliver justice to all manner of people. And we find out that the attackers of the judiciary are mainly the politicians and the politically exposed persons who, in a quest to grab power and hold power for whatever it is worth, will do everything humanly possible to undermine the cause of justice, and then, in a manner of speaking, buy or purchase judgment for themselves, even when the judgment does not incorporate the required and the requisite justice. And the one you mentioned has, in more ways than one, embarrassed the judicial system itself, because anytime the court tries to undermine the cause of justice, it brings untoward and untold embarrassment to judiciary. And once judicial officers are appointed not based on merit or their integrity or character of the personalities, the judgment that they dispense will just be in tandem with their personalities, in which case they tend to dance to the tune of the piper, because they said he who pays the piper dictates the tune.
We can see that in Sierra Leone, for instance, just after the elections, there was this dispute about who won the election or not, and we saw how that translated into violence. The same in Nigeria and in other countries of the world. In fact, even in US. But are there other issues that will come to the fore when we discuss unfair court rulings beyond electoral disputes?
Any act, any ruling of the court which looks at the person involved, or where the judge sitting in judgment considers not the law or the evidence brought before it, but considers the personality and the connection of the person, then there cannot be a settled justice in that regard. Because not only that you see that a lot in political adjudications, you also see that in business rulings of the courts, where some judges make themselves available to be compromised, not by sheer intimidation, but by fiduciary and financial inducement. I recall a particular matter I had in Cameroon. My client had problems with a government agency, CNIC, and then we went to court in Cameroon. After the trial, the date was reserved for judgment. The judge himself called us into his chamber, myself and my Cameroonian representative, a lawyer, and told us that he wouldn't be able to deliver judgment because we were obviously had convinced the court and the judgment was to obviously go in our favor. But he said that he had only 6 months to retire and that he wouldn't want to incur the wrath of the state. That if he gives such judgment that will be against the state, that he may not retire in peace. And I tell you, this happened about 3 years ago. Till date, there has not been any judgment in that matter. And when the court has told us so, the judge has told us so, we had to change our tactics to deploy political and diplomatic solution to the impasse because the judicial process could not be concluded.
Let me get this submission from you, being a legal practitioner yourself. How frustrating is the issue of adjournment of cases?
Well, unending adjournment is a very frustrating tactic deployed essentially in most cases by the state. In some cases, such tactics of use of adjournment to prolong cases can also be deployed by the defense counsel. A case in point was the case of Major Hamza Mustafa, former chief security officer of the late maximum ruler Sani Abacha. He stood trial for a lengthy period of 12 years before the matter was dispensed in court. And people have said, the judges themselves have said that it took that long because the defense counsel was deploying those tactics to ensure that the regime which he perceived was against the interest of Mustafa. We wanted such regime to exhaust itself. And that was why throughout the 8 years of President Obasanjo, of course, you remember that Obasanjo was thrown into jail when Sani Abacha was the head of state. So they felt that the bitterness was still in his mind and that he could use a state coercion to ensure that he didn't get justice. So the defense counsel used the adjournment to cause delay until his government terminated after 8 years. And by the 12th year, which was the succeeding government, Mustafa was discharged and acquitted. So it's a very terrible tactic that undermines the cause of justice, because justice delayed is said to be justice denied. And that is why it is a condemnable tactic that should not be encouraged. And in Nigeria, the Administration of Criminal Justice Act of 2015 tried as much as possible to legislate on issues relating to such deployment of adjournment to delay the course of trial. The rules of courts have made it that in some cases, in some jurisdictions, in some states, a maximum number of adjournments that can be taken. In some cases, 5, in some cases 6, that you can't take more than 6 adjournments on a particular matter before you get to deliver judgment.
Politics and governance are two parallel lines, but we can never say they are opposite of each other or one another. You rightly stated how politicians or political actors influence the judicial system. You mentioned some of the resulting implications or repercussions on the society and, of course, businesses. But how do the outcomes of perceived unfair rulings threaten national security? And have you seen this situation play out in Nigeria?
When people perceive that the judgment delivered by a judicial officer is not fair in all intents and purposes, the people will tend to take laws into their hands. Not only does such practice dampen the morale of the people or the trust of the people on the judiciary, it makes the people to be lawless because they feel that going to court will be a waste of time, that they will not get judgment. And that is the case we see in Nigeria and in other African countries where the judicial system is undermined, and then the people have very little confidence in the judiciary and they resort to self-help. Resort to self-help will often lead to violence. A typical case is the case of Muhammad Yusuf, the founder of Boko Haram in Borno State. He was perceived not to have been given fair treatment in the hands of the state. He was arrested by the military and handed over to the police, and somewhere along the line, he was extrajudicially killed. The people who killed him have not been unmasked, and his followers now wanted to take a pound of flesh from the society, and that was the origin of insurgency through Boko Haram in Borno State. And that now festered to other parts of northern Nigeria region, and the rest is history. Nigeria has been struggling with this challenge since 2009. We are looking at close to 15 years, and the challenge is still there. Now it has become a regional challenge because West Africa has been engulfed in those challenges, and it has also snowballed down to Central Africa. So you see that something that started with perceived lack of justice has become an international problem that has refused to go. So that is a very typical example of what we are talking about. And in other cases where there are pockets of judgments that undermine justice, judgments that are clearly and manifestly not correct, you can see that having lost hope and confidence in judiciary will resort to self-help, and there will be all hell will let loose. We see that a lot where communities tussle for land, when there are land disputes that will drag for ages in the courts, and when the people lose confidence in the court system, they resort to self-help, and there will be violence, loss of lives and properties will ensue. It happened in Ife Modakeke, it happened in Aguleri Muleri, it happened in Zakibiam and the rest of them, all around the country and beyond in West Africa, because of the challenges associated with lack of perceived justice. And that is why justice must be done and must be seen to have been done. When the judicial officer gives or delivers justice that is not seen to have been done, it will now be sending very wrong signal to the minds of the people.
So this is where we wrap up the interview, Barrister Fred. But just before I let you go, from all that you've said, I think I've taken down a few notes. And from my understanding so far, some of the influences on the judicial system, not just in Nigeria, but across Africa, maybe the world, one is that lack of political neutrality. And then there is the issue of trust deficit as well as financial inducement. But going forward, how can these problems be addressed and have the judicial system serve everybody regardless of their orientation, color, ethnicity, or religion?
Solving a problem will start by identifying what the problems really are. And once the problems are clearly identified, you now go to the root of the causes of those problems. It is only then that you begin to proffer solutions on how to solve the problems. What is the root of injustice? What is the root of wrong delivery of judgment? What is the root of delivering judgment that is devoid of justice? It starts by who is sitting in judgment. Who is that officer, judicial officer, that is sitting in the court to dispense justice? Is that judicial officer appointed on merit or appointed on nepotism? The second thing is, how independent is the judicial system in any jurisdiction? If the judicial system is not independent politically, in practice, and in all ways, and in funding and financing, such will not allow the officers to be bold enough to dispense justice to all manner of persons. In that case, you will now begin to have government justice and the people's justice. The third aspect of the solution towards this is to ensure that strong institutions are built. The judiciary should be one of the strongest institutions that should be courageous and bold, such that irrespective of whose ox is God, the judicial officer must be encouraged to dispense justice without fear or favor, without ill will, and without consideration of who is involved. The very moment any society achieves these milestones, I can tell you that the society will grow on the trajectory of justice, rule of law, equity, fairness, and goodness to all manner of men and manner of persons.
Barrister Fred Nzioku is a Nigerian constitutional lawyer. In rounding up, Gad Shamaki Peters, a security analyst in Nigeria, weighs in on recent happenings regarding the ongoing End Bad Governance protest, whose very initial call for the demonstration was to address the economic challenges facing the country. However, days after the demonstrations began, rallies in some locations turned violent, characterized by vandalism and looting, killings, and arrests of individuals. In the northwestern region of the country, Russian flags were flown by protesters who chanted change and suggested a power shift, a situation condemned by a majority of the population. Shamaki Peters, the executive director of Clean Foundation currently tracking the developments, responds to questions in this brief chat, which first touched on the issue of unlawful arrests by the police.
Well, I know a number of arrests have been going on, and it's difficult to know who has been arrested or not. And because we cannot take away politics in this issue, people could be arrested even when they've not contributed a dime to the process because some other persons do not like them. And for me, I think we should downplay the issue of whether people are sponsoring the protest, ethnic angle of the protest, religious angle of the protest, and look at the merit that if the system has not created the situation, people wouldn't have protested. So government should be in a hurry to address those conditions that necessitated the protest. Because like the African proverb we say, if there is no crack in the wall of your house, the lizard will not have a place to stay in between. So the government have put itself in this position where opposition may likely take advantage or external forces may take advantage of it. So it's there for the government to close this gap, establish cordial relationship with the citizens, and gain the confidence of the people and be able to assure the people that government have good intention.
This brings me to one very interesting development, which was the use of Russian flags by some protesters in northwestern states, particularly Kano and Katsina. Now, what do you make of this development?
It's a very unfortunate situation. But again, when you look at those states, they are states that are pretty close to the border with Niger. You agree too with me that Niger has severed the relationship with France, the US, UK, and several other governments and is trying to embrace Russia. And because, again, we are not sure of the level of education and exposure of those individual characters that had those flags, we are not in a position to speak about their understanding of the implication of their action. And I hope that those of them that were arrested will be prosecuted, because this is a clear act of unpatriotic act. It's an attempt to take Nigeria back to 70 or 80 years ago. And it's not a process that we want to accept as citizens of this country. We do not want to be colonized the second time. And so this issue of flagging around with the Russian flag is totally unacceptable, and I condemn it in totality as an individual.
We also saw quickly that the Nigerian securities sector architecture, led by the Chief of Defense Staff, was quick to react, and he said that Nigeria will not welcome in any way the campaign that will connote power shift or coup.
It's very important that Service Chief made that strong statement, because as citizens of Nigeria, we are not welcoming any coup. We've enjoyed 25 years of uninterrupted democracy, and we want to keep experimenting until we get it right. We need legitimate government in place. So those running around with the flag, I want to call them to desist from that and call on the security agencies to track them, trace them, arrest them, and prosecute them. and ensure that our borders are fully secured and our security agencies are on top of all the situation. Because in the first instance, how was such a flag smuggled into the country, or how was such flag produced within the country that is kept the intelligence agencies within the country? So I think they need to get back to a drawing board and pay attention to some of these challenges and ensure that they are addressing it professionally and ensuring that we do not subject this country into the leadership or rulership or authority of any other country. Yes, we disagree with some actions of government, but Nigeria must remain as a country for all of us to be able to function and live as a people.
That was Gad Shamaki Peters, a security analyst and the Executive Director of Clean Foundation, Nigeria. This is a wrap-up of this episode of In the Sahel, WADR's security program, aiming to tell the African security crisis the African way. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to my guests and colleagues for their contributions. Join this frequency, 94.9 FM, West Africa Democracy Radio, every Friday at 7:30 a.m. and the same day at 7:30 p.m. for the rebroadcast. We are also live on WADR.org, and join the discussion on our social media platforms, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram at WADR News, and on Facebook, WADR English Service. I'm Abdullahi Hassan. It's a bye for now.